The capture is, of course, now behind us, but the investigation barrels ahead. Today, as we mentioned, the surviving suspect starting to communicate with police as investigators dive deeper into his past and the strange odyssey of his older brother. ABC's chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross in Boston once again tonight. Brian, good evening.
Well, good evening, Dan. Federal authorities put off plans to file formal criminal charges today. They'll likely do it tomorrow. Meanwhile, at the hospital, 19-year-old Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is reported to be occasionally awake and communicating with federal agents through writing. He can't speak because of wounds he suffered during the capture.
Officials say the evidence against Tsarnaev in the bombings is overwhelming. Authorities say this photo shows him in the white cap about to place his bomb near 8-year-old Martin Richard, who was killed, and his 7-year-old sister Jane, who was seriously injured. Also nearby, the two Norden brothers, each of whom lost a leg in the blast.
There's no explaining the savagery involved here. There's no explanation for it.
It's been almost 2 full days now since Tsarnaev was captured from his hiding place in a boat, as seen in the newly released thermal images. Federal agents have now begun to question him about possible accomplices or other explosive devices, but they're communicating only in writing because of wounds to his throat during the capture, which authorities say may have been self-inflicted.
And it's questionable when and whether he'll be able to talk again. Doesn't mean he can't communicate.
The wider investigation into motive now centers on the dead brother, 26-year-old Tamerlan, who recently had begun to link to jihadist videos.
He brainwashed his younger brother, and from there, what happened on Marathon Day.
Tamerlan reportedly was a changed man and began to link to the videos after a 6-month trip last year to Russia and Chechnya. Chechen rebel groups, known for their fierce attacks on Russian targets, have denied any connection to the Boston bombings. But authorities today are pointing to a statement made several years ago in which a rebel leader said, "Our enemy is not only Russia, but also America, Britain, and Israel." In a letter to the FBI today, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee suggested an intelligence failure and questioned why the FBI failed to keep Tamerlan on its radar after questioning him about possible terror ties 2 years ago at the request of Russia.
I give them the benefit of the doubt, but he was on the radar screen, and somehow he got off the radar screen and traveled overseas to one of the most dangerous parts of the world.
Once federal charges are filed, authorities say they're likely to include counts that provide for the death penalty, although the final decision on whether to seek the death penalty will be up to Attorney General Eric Holder. Dan?
Brian, I know that we don't know yet what this young man is telling police, but from your sources, from what they've told you thus far, do they think there's an imminent threat still out there?
At this point, no one really thinks there's an imminent threat. They believe these two men probably acted alone and that all of the explosive devices have been accounted for. But as they begin to ask questions now in writing with the suspect in the hospital, they expect to get more answers in the coming days.
Brian, thank you. And for more on the legal case against Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, we're going to turn now to Michael Garcia, a former U.S. attorney who was the prosecutor in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and the embassy bombings in Africa in 1998. Michael, thanks for joining us. After the charges are filed, what happens next?
Things move very quickly. There's a certain period of time, days, not weeks, that this suspect will have to be brought before a judge. Once that happens, it will change the dynamic of how agents, how law enforcement can question him.
There's all this talk about the public safety exception, which means that the investigators don't need to read him his rights. Why is that so important?
Important because you want to know, is there a ticking time bomb out there? Is there a loaded gun? Are there unstable chemicals in this case? So to protect the public, you need to know where these things might be.
But does it really matter whether they read him his rights or not? Isn't he either going to be likely to cooperate or not?
More likely to get a quick response off the cuff. You go in, you ask the question, where are your bombs? Where are you keeping explosives? Where'd you drop the gun? Rather than you sit down, you walk through a Miranda warning, someone has a chance to step back, think, what's this about an attorney? What's this about a right to remain silent? You need to protect the public. You need to do that quickly. You need the information.
Do you believe that this young man is likely to face the death penalty?
Given the nature of these crimes, I would say the answer to that is yes.
The city of Boston is angry, justifiably, and that anger is unlikely to dissipate very quickly. So can he get a fair trial in that city?
Very difficult to move a trial. The legal standard, essentially no jury in this city will be able to look fairly on this evidence. Very high standard. I believe he will face trial in Boston.